Good day, everyone! It seems to be that properties have become a rather hot topic as of late. With the prosperity brought on by the 7th Astral Era, it only makes sense that various groups of people would attempt to settle down and enjoy constructing their own living spaces, whether it be for themselves or a free company containing dozens, if not hundreds of people. However, a lot of people seem to only buy the land because they think the area looks pretty. This narrow-minded view on real estate is likely enough to give the monetarists of Ul'dah an actual heart attack. So instead, what if we were to judge the properties based on the countries they're associated with? We just may be able to attempt to understand what the true value of these locations are. But breaking down entire cultures in a quick expose is no easy feat. So I have a fellow researcher joining me today.
Hello, my name is Final Fantasy XIV Fun Facts. Long name, I guess, but that is the Twitter account I go by. People can follow me there, and I put out 2 fun fact tweets a day, and I always retweet art. I look at all my replies, look at DMs and all that sort of stuff. I really like engaging the community on all types of 14 lore, whether it's MSQ related, whether it's animals, hunts, book related things, all that sort of stuff. I absolutely love the lore of the game, and I love seeing people talk about it.
So, with all that out of the way, we'll attempt to break down each country by 4 factors: their culture, location, military, and economy. With a better understanding of these things, we will let you be the judge as to whether or not these countries are worth purchasing land from. Let us begin. Starting with Limsa Lominsa. For my take, the culture of Limsa Lominsa is rather fluid at the moment. It's only thanks to the recent developments of Merluid Blohisfun that this country actually has the developmental properties right now needed for a country to steadily evolve into something greater than the sum of its parts. Before her radical changes to the city-state, things were rather unsavory for a lot of people, and it's only thanks to her that things like trade and economic growth have become possible for them.
What I really like about Limsa Lominsa is its history of sort of both surviving and thriving in its environment. So when it looks at the surviving and thriving part, you've got the pirates, you've got farmers, and you've got a bunch of travelers. And its origins are actually not exactly from pirates. They sort of, landed on that area over there, and by looking at some of the kobolds and the flora and fauna that lived there, they then decided that they had to live off of their ships. So there's a whole culture around both the shipping industry, farming, woodworking, and all that sort of stuff. And what's really cool about the culture of Limsa Lominsa is who flocked there. So you get a lot of different types of seawolf Rogadins, a lot of traveling Makote, traveling Lalafels, of course Hures, and it's a really, really diverse area.
Now, as far as Limsa Lominsa's location goes, it's actually in a phenomenal spot as far as Eorzea's geology is concerned. There's a very good reason why the city-state of Nim in the 5th Astral Era was considered a booming place for things like trade and commerce, because the Isle of Vrilbrand is a wonderful location for not only seafaring states, but getting goods and services to a centralized location easily.
One of the cool things about the location of Vrilbrand is it's so close yet so far to the rest of Aldernard. And the culture about being far out west, it's closer to Sharlayan, it's closer to Erzlant, and all those sort of things. So you have a lot of seafaring trade. You have people that have never been there before. You have some people that have never set foot in Eorzea before, and they venture there first. And that location is so far out west, while it's also kind of northern in a way from people. So there's a sort of tribalism from the pirates and travelers and merchants in Vrilbrand, where they have a lot of, inspiration from there. They really enjoy that place, and they tend to stick around there.
Moving on to Limsa Lominsa's military, you'd be hard-pressed to find naval forces that are able to match them across Eorzea or the continent of Aldernard in the first place. However, their ground forces aren't as well known. Lominsa has been historically responsible for hiring mercenaries and free companies to assist with grounds projects. So while their navy may be considered very powerful, ground forces have left a lot to be desired.
In the most part, they are relying mostly on their strength at sea. Their yellow jackets, their pirates, their levies and whatnot. The strength of that isn't too strong, but when you have a location like an island of Vilbrand, you don't have to rely on your ground force. So you end up having a lot of ships and shipwrights and pirates and all that sort of stuff that you're able to take advantage of. And whenever somebody is trying to contest your area, trying to contest your waters, you're able to use that sort of heavy arm of your navy to sort of reinforce the threat level that you might have, which is why they've stayed so strong, why their culture is so bound to their idea of their ships, is that's pretty much what they're relying on. But other than that, they're not going to be too heavy in sheer numbers to try and outdo any sort of ground forces.
Lastly, for Limsa, let's get a look at their economy. Economically, Limsa is actually doing very well right now. Thanks to the new policies of Admiral Merleweb, the city-state is booming in things like shipbuilding, metallurgy, seafood trade, as well as acting as a hub for naval dispatch. Meanwhile, outlawing piracy was the thing that made all of this possible. Lominsa would not be the booming metropolis of trade it is slowly becoming without Merleweb's guidance.
Now, when you take a look at Lominsa's economy, obviously the first thing people think about is the piracy, but with that having been outlawed, people tend to forget its strength of its farms. Any one of the outlying areas, Outer Lenosha, Western Lenosha, Southern Lenosha, all those sort of things. And what's really cool is you tend to look at the farms, the beautiful landscapes. It's early on in the game, so people tend to forget, but with such a large degree of their economy focused on farms, you end up having a lot of things that you're able to rely on, a lot of natural resources. So like you mentioned, you have ships, you have metallurgy, you have trade and fishing. And what's really cool about that is that bolsters their strength of trade. By having all of their shipping lanes controlled, they're able to trade all of what they have from making on land, honestly, back out at sea, being able to travel anywhere for the most part. They're able to make a lot of stuff of what they have at home on land, and that sort of bolsters their own economic strength.
So, in summary for Lominsa, while their ground force military may not be much to write home about, their navy is nothing to scoff at. Given their prime location within the continent of Aldenard, they are primed for things like economic booms, as well as all sorts of naval trade. Culturally, though, unless you're the kind of person who's prepared to deal with rough and tough work on a regular basis, it may be hard for you to adjust to their living settings. But if you're prepared to grow and mature alongside them, you'd be hard-pressed to find people that would be more willing to help you in the long run. Moving on, we have the unbelievably diverse country of Ul'dah. Now, as some of you may know, this was one of two city-states that branched off of the previous country of Belladia. So, how did this country fare after its separation over the years? Culturally, Ul'dah is a bit poor. The class divide that the city-state has had to experience recently and throughout history has always been a bit of a sore topic. Corruption has run rampant in their politics on more than one occasion, and it doesn't seem like multiple generations have been able to exercise that even after the rule of the Thorn dynasty.
One of the coolest things about Ul'dah is its reliance on its history. It's built on the foundations of a deceased city-state. It's found on the foundations of the Maki Lalafels that survived. Nowadays, you only see the Lalafels and the Hurers and various other people that traveled there, but the culture still thrives on even within its stones, its importance of magic and might.
As far as Ul'dah's location goes, it's not the best, but it's also not the worst either. While they aren't well known for things like agriculture, since very few forms of vegetation are able to grow on such arid ground, They are in a good location for things like trade, which of course they have taken full advantage of.
The location of Ul'dah is situated at the southernmost tip of the peninsula. It's literally split between Mordona and Paguthon, just to its north, and so the area is situated kind of lonely. However, while being very dry, you're also situated in a spot that's open for trade with both the east and the west. So this location, while geographically is not too good, when you think of its trade routes and mercantilism, it's actually a pretty decent location.
Meanwhile, the military of Ul'dah is nothing to scoff at. While they may not seem like much, the military might of Ul'dah is rather formidable, especially on the ground, as they have quite a variety of melee combatants as well as shock troopers that are supported by ranged mages at a distance. Their usage of might and magic makes them rather formidable.
The best part about Ul'dah, and why a lot of people might join and flock to it, is its military might. When you take a look at its cultural importance of its Sultan Sworn, or you might look at the number of stone torches or brass plates throughout the city-state, you tend to see its efforts to protect its culture and its money. And when you take a look at the amount of people that they're able to employ, it is quite mighty.
Lastly, for Ul'dah, we have easily their greatest asset, their economy. It isn't hard to say that they possess the strongest economy in all of Eorzea thanks to their trade agreements as well as additional things like the foundation of airship travel in Eorzea.
Now, when you take a look at Ul'dah's economy, it's mercantilism, it's mining, it's textiles, it's a lot of the things that people tend to look at when you look inside the city. But there's also important things outside the city as well. While they have a large number of people employed, you also can look at the gold saucer for entertainment. And you tend to take a look at they are ready to get any sort of amount of money by any means. The textiles and the silk factories, you tend to look at the medicine and Frontail's frontisserie. And you see how and why Ul'dah has such a booming economy. They take nothing for granted.
So, as you can see, while culturally Ul'dah is a bit rough around the edges, and unless you're already well known or have made a name for yourself, you may struggle, you'd have a hard time finding a stronger standing police force, as well as a stronger economy with which to grow any aspiring businesses from. Moving on, we come to the odd city-state of Gridania. Culturally, Gridania is a wonderful location if you're part of Gridania. Unfortunately, it is not a favorable spot if you are a foreigner, as this thing called the Green Wrath is able to be imposed upon you by the elementals. The Green Wrath is essentially a tax that the elementals will put on someone if they do any wrong to the forest and those living within. So, if you do not have the favor of the forest or the assistance of the Pajal to cleanse you of your quote-unquote tax, you're likely not going to be spending too much time in this country.
The culture and history of Gridania is interwoven with so many stories of pain and exile and living with the elementals that immediately it might turn people away. But throughout history, you can see that especially the Hyur and the Wildwood Elezen and Makote that live there have begun to prosper. And throughout the story, you meet a lot of different types of people who have learned to communicate with nature in of itself.
As for Gridania's location, it's actually situated rather perfectly. Being close to the center of the continent of Aldenard means that they are a prime spot for all the city-states to travel through in terms of localized trade.
Specifically, Gridania is situated between Kurthis and Garabania. Now, while both of those nations have had a rough couple of years, it's also very important that Gridania you start to see why it's very closed off and protective of its forest.
As far as Gridania's military is concerned, this is another odd analysis. If you're fighting Gridanians within their own forest, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle, as they have very dedicated units to deal with you in close quarters combat, at a range, and deploy guerrilla tactics. And that's not even beginning to explain how the elementals are going to make your life harder as a whole. However, outside of the forest, Gridanians have a bit more trouble. They're used to fighting in close quarters amongst the woods, so on open fields of battle, many of their usual tactics are more or less moot.
When you take a look at Gridania's main units, people immediately tend to think of the Yellow Serpents, but there's actually a few other units as well. You have the Blue Badgers, you have the White Wolves, you have the Red Otters, you have the Black Bears, that all focus on different parts of battle. And while Gridania may not have the outright strength or output like someone like Lominsa's pirates or their different galleys, they are at least able to be somewhat versatile in their approach, even if they're not too effective.
As far as Gridania's economy is concerned, it isn't necessarily booming nearly as much as Ul'dah or Lominsa. However, it is incredibly stable, as they've cornered things like the lumber trade, leatherworking, the manufacturing of beast-born materials, as well as being a place where most countries must travel through in order to trade with their neighbors.
The biggest parts of Gridania's economy is carpentry, farming, hunting, leatherworking. You immediately think of how they are using the forest. And through that process, that is still with communing with the elementals. For instance, animal husbandry is forbidden, so they end up having to have a very precise care of the flora and fauna around them. Ends up showing how much protection they have over their forest. And with that, they're able to trade so confidently with those around them.
With those points addressed, it's quite obvious to see that Gridania, while not the most popular city-state by some means, is extremely self-reliant. And if Eorzea were to fall on hard times, they would have likely the easiest ability to take care of themselves thanks to their pact with the elementals. Moving on to the city-state of Ishgard, Ishgardian culture is rather strong. While their social structure was more or less stable before the end of the Dragonsong War, in recent years it's only just now been allowed to evolve and change with the changing tides. So it's only a matter of time until we see just how much this city-state is able to evolve over the years.
When you take a look at Ishgard, you understand why they've had to be so strong and so close-knit. The history behind Ishgard and how its religion has impacted its architecture, how its history in fighting with the dragons has impacted its need to evolve technologically and as a people. You tend to look at the amount of Elezen and Hyur that have flocked there and left there, and you understand why it's needed to be so strong.
As far as locations go, Ishgard's is rather poor. Being located so far north has left them rather detached from most of the other city-states, so trade is more difficult, and that's not even beginning to explain the flash freeze caused by the 7th Umbral Calamity, which has only done more to harm their local ecosystem.
Ishgard is located high up in the mountains of Kurthis, and while the trade might be difficult, they've begun to be very self-reliant on themselves. They are connected to the different Dravanian forelands, for instance, so they've sort of had a connection when it comes to farming and needing for animals and whatnot. The flash freeze brought by the calamity, while it's become very cold, the Ishgardians have adapted rather quickly.
As far as military strength is concerned, challenging Ishgard has got to be the worst idea possible. Having fought dragons for 1,000 years has turned them into machines of war. Of all the city-states in Eorzea to fight, this would be the worst one to upset.
Their military is backed by the Holy See, it's backed by knights, it's backed by dragoons, and previously, as we all know, they were backed by dragons themselves. They're fighting with years of dragons. They've learned and adapted through various arts of war. They've learned how to deal with close-range combat, how to deal with long-range combat. They've learned how to deal with aerial assaults. It's no wonder why almost no city-state has ever dared to approach Ishgard.
As far as Ishgard's economy is concerned, its less than ideal location has left them incredibly self-reliant. So while they may not experience economic booms like, say, Limsa or Ul'dah, they never will face incredible recessions without very, very drastic drawbacks.
They've adapted to the cold so efficiently and so quickly that they've learned how to live with it. And through that process, especially with their religion, they've learned how to build more efficient. When you take a look at their largest parts of their economy, it's steel making, it's weapon making. From there, they've learned how to adapt, hunt, and fight. And so their economy is bolstered strictly through their history in fighting with the dragon.
And with that, it is easy to see why Ishgard is such a military superpower. Their economy, their culture, everything revolves around the idea of survival, self-sustaining, and persevering no matter what happens to them. Now we take our gaze to the Far East with Kugane. Culturally, they are rather shocking when compared to most Eorzean city-states, as everything they are is based off of the culture of Hingashi as a whole. With Kugane having an open arms policy with foreigners, you see more of a melting pot in some sections of Kugane than you would anywhere else in this archipelago.
The culture around Hingashi is rooted in their mythology, in their religion, in their history, and their specific geographical location. When taking a look at Hingashi and Kugane specifically, it is a large melting pot with a vast array of people.
Being located off of the east coast of Othard has left them not in a horrible position, but not incredibly ideal. They aren't nestled between multiple countries like the Isle of Vilbrand is, so trade, while not poor, isn't as booming as Lominsa would experience year-round.
The impact of its location, being so close to Yansha and Doma specifically, you see effect on the culture, you see an effect on its trade and its people. And its location as an island, you would think it has a large amount of people flocking to it, but due to its history, its trade policies have sort of left it somewhat isolated.
Since Kugane is only a foreign extension of the Hingashi proper, its military might is rather lacking. What strength of arms is observed in Kugane are more like a localized police force than a standing military.
The Sekisugumi have a long history. However, now, more or less, it's a police force that trains many of its local population in order to better defend its immediate property. But venturing outside of Kugane is not one of their strong suits.
As far as Kugane's economy is concerned, it's likely one of the most profitable locations in all of Hingashi, simply by the nature of being open to trade with other countries. While the rest of the island may have an isolationist philosophy, this location does not, allowing its wealth to boom when compared to other locations.
One of the first things when stepping foot inside of Kugane is its port. And its port is a large part of where it gets a lot of its commerce and economy flowing. And with that, specifically, they're able to trade with Yansha and the other nations of Eorzea, and that's where a lot of its strength lies, whether it's rice and field work or whether it's fish and alcohol. There's a whole array of where its economy can gain its strength from.
So while the archipelago of Hingashi may not be as welcoming to outsiders on a whole, the location of Kugane, its open arms policy, as well as willingness to do trade with multiple other countries, has left it one of the most welcoming places for foreign trade and industry in the world. Bringing our gaze back west, we come to the famous city-state of Radz-at-Han. Culturally, this location is easily one of the oldest countries to exist in the current age, having existed well before the Six Umbral Calamity.
Thavnar's location is built on its history, the history of the Aura, the history of the dragons, the history of Hyur in the area, have impacted it to where its importance as a city-state for trade and for people to flock to as a rest stop, it's almost integral to its history.
As locations go, you won't be able to find a better island to settle than that of Thavnair. Being located right in the middle of the three great continents, as well as the profiting bounty, the ocean section located right next to it, things like trade, fishing, as well as other enterprises are always on hand.
Now, the location of Thavnair is situated, interestingly, almost direct line between Dalmasca and Ul'dah. Now, as a central location for trade, it's literally the crossway point between Othard and Ul'dah. And by being such a centralized location, it's become very important through the whole crisis between the Garleans, Ul'dah, Othard, and all of these central figures. Its location is very important to what has impacted it throughout its history, but also where it's going to go in the future.
At first glance, you would not think that Radz-at-Han has a very robust military, and yet its defensive forces are shockingly efficient. Having trained for years, they do have many branches of their military that are more than prepared to defend their island and interests from almost any sort of invasion.
When specifically looking at the Radiant Host, you understand its history in sort of protecting the island. While we come across many of the Radiant Hosts throughout the story and side quests, its importance of the Radiant Host to defend the whole island to the best of their ability is something that shouldn't be underestimated. It's, by and large, an extension of the government of Radz-at-Han, and by nature, they're extremely well trained, disciplined, and versatile.
As far as economies go, Radz-at-Han is so strong that it would make Ul'dah blush. Being the center of trade for Ul'dah, Ilsabard, and Othard, they've never lacked for mercantile agreements. On top of that, their history for alchemical productions are second to none, making it one of their greatest exports.
One of the largest manufacturing companies in Radz-at-Han focuses on textiles, and immediately you can see a parallel to Ul'dah. And by also including alchemy, you understand why they're such a powerful country to begin with. By rivaling Ul'dah in almost every sense, you tend to see its work and efficiency throughout the different country. They're able to trade with whoever, however they can meet them.
Given Radz-at-Han's age, discipline, and technique, it's easy to see why even Garlemald refused to annex them. This country is so powerful in terms of trade that to suddenly topple them would freeze countless assets. So, it's easy to see why the people of Radz-at-Han usually live long and happy lives, regardless of what section of the island they find themselves in. And the last city-state we'll be covering is up to the northwest, Old Sharlayan. Culturally, this location is spectacular. You'd have a hard time finding a more stable and reliable country than this. Their social structure ensures that every Sharlayan has the chance at higher education, as well as the chance of gaining a profitable career. Mind you, while there have been corrupt members of the Forum, their central body of government, their checks and balance system is so profound, it has always kept those people away from total control.
The efficiency of Old Sharlayan and its control of not only the island, but an interest in other territory allows Old Sharlayan to be a center for education, for knowledge, for information. By nature of that, they've become a powerful force, maybe not by other means, but even if just by information alone.
As far as locations go, Old Sharlayan is nothing to be too proud of. While their archipelago is broad and does cover a sizable chunk of land, they're rather detached, not only from Eorzea, but the three great continents as a whole, relying mostly on trade from Lominsa to stay connected.
The archipelago by itself is very far north. By some states, you could think of it as further north than Kurthis. And by that means, you end up having a very far off country that is very secluded, especially to other people.
As far as Old Sharlayan's military is concerned, there kind of is none. They've always had a non-combative philosophy, meaning they have little to no standing military. they would need to heavily rely on magic and technology to defend themselves if someone were to invade. And if those things were to become unavailable or fail them, they would collapse.
One of the most interesting things about Sharlayan is its necessity towards automaton. Now, when you take a look at the automatons, they've had to go almost extensive research in order to have an appropriate amount of defense for their research. But past that, there is pretty much no defense to speak of when it comes to Old Sharlayan. It is the threats of their knowledge that is their best defense.
And lastly, Old Sharlayan's economy, which despite having little to no military presence, is rather strong. The entire reason the Aetheryte network across Eorzea, Ilsabard, and Othard is so efficient is because of this city-state. Anytime you teleport and you're taxed, that money goes directly to this country.
Due to the history of Ethernet travel blossoming from Sharlayan knowledge, and due to the 7th Umbral Calamity's impact on Aethernet travel, Old Sharlayan now has a monopoly over Aethernet travel, and from there they gain a lot of their money. But you also have other interesting industries such as publishing and education. It is where everyone wants to go, for instance. So when you take a look at what they're able to command, it is the flow of information, but also the flow of people around the whole world generally.
The country of Old Sharlayan is an amazing example of the old saying that knowledge is power. With little to no standing military, it would still be unwise to invade them, as the amount of information, knowledge, and the maintaining of Aetheryte would be so great of a loss that it would make invasion almost not worth it. And that, my friends, will be all from us. We've covered a great deal of data today, and I hope some of it proved useful to you. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel if you've not already, as I provide new lore videos every week. But I did not do today's research alone, as you could tell. Big thanks to my friend Final Fantasy XIV Fun Facts for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me. If anybody is also interested in other 14 fun facts, these include little tidbits about the lore, locations, animals, people, and all that sort of thing, you can follow me at FFXIVXD on Twitter.
Links will be in the description. We hope you had as much fun listening to this as we had fun putting it together. And with that, I hope you all have an amazing day. Till next we meet, stay safe, my friends.